Awesome. All right, so this is Settings UX, this time with Daniel talking about settings in Access. This is a continuation of some of the work that Rayana has done to collect feedback from the UX design team across the different groups to understand how different people have been tackling settings, or how certain aspects of settings have held them back in delivering what they really wanted to deliver. So yeah, I guess for the first question is, yeah, tell us a little about some of the work that you've done in the past with settings, Daniel.
Yeah, so I started with compliance, and in compliance, we had a number of settings that were added to try and allow for compliance checks or compliance features to work with GitLab. And it was kind of a learning on the go because we at the time we didn't have a robust compliance solution, so we're kind of starting from scratch, and we weren't really familiar with where to take it apart from just adding specific line item features like have a check for this feature or protection if this action happens, and it would be an on-off just to allow that feature to occur. Going forward to things like access, there were again settings or changes that we would do for things like with 2FA or things in the back end to allow for interactions with admins and users if there were passes that were resets to accounts or resets to access that admins needed to ensure or a user needed to have access to. And then it's one of the other things that we're looking at right now is there is a need to have a place where settings can be defined, at least for an organization, for how the access gets given to members who are not part of the organization. And so when they get invited in as a freelancer or something, how those settings apply outside of the organization to have those features of those access controls restricted. So nothing specific, at least in the new task we're working on, but there is work that needs to be done in order to make sure that there's certain checks or security protocols in the settings that ensure some of this protection.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about the organization level? Because I'm familiar with like instance, groups, and projects. And when you talk about organization level, like how does that fit into that kind of paradigm of instance, groups, projects?
Yeah, it's more or less either the instance environment, if it's a self-managed environment, or the instance or the group container, like the organization's group that they live in on the .com service. So it's functionally those two pieces. And so we would look at the settings or the access restrictions tied to those two entry points.
Okay, cool. And is that, have you done any solution validation on the stuff that you've looked into there, or has it been already shipped?
Most of it was very just one simple thing. We needed to have this thing turn on or have this feature allowed to be done, but that was previously in compliance, and I think most of that stuff was validated well enough. I think at least for us, because in compliance, again, it was so new that it was kind of like, well, we don't really necessarily know where to put this stuff, so we're going to put it in, for example, like permissions, or I'm looking at the settings right now, like things like advanced. We made some changes there in regards to removing the group, how there's protections for that.
Are you able to share your screen just so that we're looking
Yeah,
at the same thing?
let me share real quick.
Thanks a lot.
Just 1 second.
Because it's always interesting what different people in different groups have access to. And it's like,
Right.
yeah.
I think this will work. Oops, sorry, I think I lost it. Let me try one more time. There we go.
Awesome.
So here I'm looking on the .com instance, just a test group that I made. There was some changes that were done here with this modal and the security or the double check, double verify to delete, and how this went through. There was some changes with, let's see. Let's see. Might have been in the admin area. Yeah, I think there was some things done with external authentication. Let's see. Might have changed some stuff around project deletion protection. This was something that was updated or changed. There were some tweaks made to that because there is the feature to allow project deletion at different levels. So only admin, but then, like, for example, like a user could delete their project in an environment where perhaps the admin didn't want that to have happen. So I'm not sure. I think because I'm using a different or maybe an outdated version of my GitLab, my GDK, that's probably not appearing here.
Okay, no problem.
But yeah, just some minor things here and there. I think the main problem, at least in regards to just all of the settings in general that we've experienced, was where does something belong? If it belongs to a particular place or it makes sense, does it need to have a section of its own, like, for example, restricted visibility levels, or can it be added to something like, in this case, default project deletion protection, only admins? There was the additional feature I just mentioned where you make some subsetting of that. So then trying to understand how that setting gets changed, things like that. And then
So, so how did you navigate like that decision of like, okay, I have this new setting, where should it go? Was it up to solely your group, or was it a cross stage kind of discussion back and
Yeah,
forth?
I spoke with my PM about that quite a bit to understand, what makes sense to us, what would make sense to someone in a compliance-minded environment, to see if they were going to go in and make changes, what would they think they would need it. And then also communicating across the organization, talking with the foundations group and other UX team members, just for some feedback. Is this crazy? Does this make sense? Things like that. But that's generally the sort of idea that we were thinking about.
So this is like the admin general kind of settings area. For someone in compliance, like your main persona, would they spend most of their time in that general settings area, or are they kind of set it and forget it kind of scenario?
Yeah, so for my previous experience in or understanding with the compliance use case is that it would more or less be you define or establish the compliance protocol or the compliance restrictions, limitations within your organization. And once that gets done, your work gets passed through these checks, and it's kind of an automated process, or it's hoped to be automated, because compliance checks are so manually driven, external to an organization. So like having to fill out forms or having to go make phone calls or checks or send documentation to different locations. The idea being that within our environment, it would kind of just be a set it and forget it to some degree. So again, like having automation tools, having checks or protocols or settings that say, if this happens, then this gets done, or prevent these things happening if something else happens. So more or less it's kind of just one time set and forget.
Are there any kind of examples of work that's upcoming in your group now related to settings?
So in Access, the only thing that we have would be in regards to 2FA. But there is nothing specific in regards to like a setting or particular change that would have been applied or that's going to happen. So the 2FA is going to get passed by normal procedure, but it's what happens after that. So I'll show it real quick. I'll share the screen. So here, allow users to request access. Um, there is a feature or a setting that we're going to have to help users regain access if there's a 2FA problem. So like if they have forgotten or lost
Phone or
their
something like that.
yeah, exactly, or their keys or their code or whatever they have lost for 2FA, to have a feature to allow a reset for that, or a second verify way of verifying. So having an admin check. So we're kind of trying look at some of these settings or features here to see what can we do to try and fix that particular problem or that particular use case.
Cool. And are you working within the confines of the existing settings thing here, or are you and your group kind of thinking like, this could be a lot better if we could do X, Y, Z, or if this could be broken out or something like that? Are you exploring anything like that?
No, I think the primary focus right now is to make sure that we work within the standards and practices that is kind of accepted across the industry in terms of like 2FA access and 2FA restriction and reset, how someone would go through that process to regain an account, to make sure that we're maintaining security and we're not going to be victims of fraud or minimizing those opportunities. So a lot of it's more procedural and not necessarily so much of a UX or a visual UI changes to the system, more so just logic or flow to that.
Gotcha. And with the 2FA settings, is that like one of these settings that would have a cascading effect as well, or would it be um, more straightforward? Um,
Yeah, it should be pretty straightforward. It should just be a matter of this is a feature we're going to turn on or remove or
hmm,
change, but it will just basically a one-to-one or if this, then that sort of
hmm.
behavior. Nothing robustly complex or anything. Again, like I said, we're trying to maintain industry standards for using 2FA and how that works across organizations.
Okay, cool. And do you have any examples of design work related to settings that you're proud of, either at GitLab or any time before GitLab?
Um, right now, well, the problem is I don't think I've had any experience or any sort of instances where there's been robust changes or overhaul or in-depth work for settings for a project or an object. I know coming up past the 2FA stuff that we're doing in Access, there is going to be an investigation on policy creation and settings around that. So it's kind of like, let's see, I'll show you the issue here. I think this is it. So adding project deletion as a policy behavior. So we would want to turn that feature on in the settings. So having some feature that would protect or change project deletion, as I mentioned earlier, but as that relates to a bigger project, I'll show you that one here. The bigger issue is project level policies. So what sort of other policies or settings would need to be done around that? So custom policies, custom settings. So this is something that we're going to start on, and it's quite a large change because it's going to associate to the way that we have our access restrictions. So it's going to work around, let's see here, if we go to like the members, for example. We currently have those standard user access levels like owner, maintainer, reporter, developer, guest. And so defining or understanding, do we change those roles, or do we add to them, or do we kind of make them more granular? So some of this that we're going to have to change or think about, if we change the role here, then
Right.
what sort of features or settings that go associated with that when you look at like the settings for a project or something, what would need to be changed for that? And that's something that we have to think about, is if you're going to start making these policy level changes for a project, then they don't exist really here. There's no place to put them. So we might have to add a new container for that. And so that's
Mm.
something I think that further down the road will be that, large project I would hope to be proud of.
Yep.
But currently speaking, I don't have one that's really dramatic, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah, that's totally fine. We don't need dramatics. Cool. That concludes most of my kind of formal questions for our
Mhm.
chat today. Is there anything in the work that's upcoming for my group right now, looking at settings and navigation, that you would want to be informed about or want more insight on as I progress on this?
Yeah, I think for us, nothing specific just yet in the settings screen. The navigation, possibly more so, but that ties to the other projects that we're working on in the working group to make containers more extensible. So the object or the concept of project versus group, why do those exist in a separate space or a separate environment? How we can bring those together, how would that improve the navigation if we kind of merge those objects, or would it add confusion or complexity? So kind of exploring that. In our research that we did in our CMS around subgroups, we found that there was total confusion for new users of what a project versus what a group was, and trying to build out an organization and how people navigate around building that was confusing for people. So that would be the key thing that I would discuss.
Okay, cool. So I might do something similar with navigation. So we'll reschedule that juicy one for another time. So thank you very much for your time today, Daniel, and hope to speak to you soon.
Yeah, cool. Good to meet you. Take it easy. See
Yep.
ya.
Yeah, see ya.